So now the girl who can't even speak properly thinks she can handle Latin? Professor Gaines's voice rang out, sharp and cutting, his finger aimed straight at Amara, like she was something to be put in her place. Go on, show us how badly this ends. Amara Bennett was already on her feet, one hand braced against the desk, the other lifting her paper high, her jaw set as the room buzzed with laughter behind her. A few students leaned forward, grinning, feeding off the moment. Gaines turned to the board, marker scratching fast as he filled it with a dense, punishing passage. Every line meant to break her. He stepped closer, invading her space, a smug smile spreading. "Translate this," he said, "word for word. Do it right, and I'll quit." The room held its breath, waiting for her to crack. And he had no idea he was about to hear her answer him better than he ever could. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The lecture hall buzzed with early morning energy. Students slumped in seats, some clutching coffee cups, others typing notes on laptops. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long rectangles on the tiled floor. Amara Bennett sat in the middle row, back straight, pen poised over a fresh notebook page. Unlike many of her classmates who relied on technology, she preferred handwritten notes. The feeling of ink on paper helped cement the knowledge in her mind. Her dark curls were pulled back neatly, and her focus never left the front of the room. Professor Harold Gaines stood before them, his tweed jacket and bow tie a walking stereotype of academic prestige. At 58, his salt-and-pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses completed the image he carefully cultivated, that of the distinguished scholar whose very presence demanded respect. "The beauty of classical texts," Gaines announced, pacing before the blackboard, "is that they've been definitively interpreted by scholars far greater than any of us will ever be." His voice carried the comfortable authority of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. This passage from Cicero's Pro Archia Poeta clearly demonstrates the principle I outlined last week. He gestured to the Latin text projected on the screen behind him. Notice the use of the subjunctive here. It can only be interpreted as expressing doubt, not possibility, as some modern, less rigorous translations might suggest. Amara's pen paused over her notebook. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she reread the passage. Something didn't align with her understanding. She hesitated, weighing the risk of speaking up against her certainty about the text. Her hand rose slowly. Professor Gaines's eyebrows lifted slightly above his glasses. "Miss Bennett?" His tone suggested mild surprise that anyone would question him. "Sir, I believe in this context, the subjunctive might actually indicate potential rather than doubt. The historical context of Cicero's defense suggests—" "Historical context?" Gaines interrupted, his smile not reaching his eyes. The room fell quiet. Every student sensed the shift in atmosphere. "And what historical context would you be referring to, Miss Bennett?" Amara didn't flinch. "The political climate during Cicero's defense of Archias. This particular passage relates to citizenship rights, which were especially contested during that period. If we consider the political pressure Cicero was under, this subjunctive construction could be read as—" "I see." Gaines cut her off, his voice sharp like a knife. "And where exactly did you conduct your specialized research on Roman citizenship law and Ciceronian rhetoric? Was it during your time at— where was it again?" "Lincoln High." A few students snickered. Gaines had never mentioned her high school before. He had clearly looked up her background, a public school in a working-class neighborhood, and was using it as a weapon. "I read Greenwood's analysis in the Journal of Roman Studies," Amara replied calmly, though her fingers tightened around her pen. "And Professor Watkins' counter-argument in Classical Quarterly." Professor Gaines's smile tightened. He hadn't expected her to cite scholarly sources. "Interesting that you'd mention Greenwood," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "His theories are considered quite fringe, hardly the consensus view taught in serious academic institutions." A student 2 rows ahead of Amara turned to look at her, eyebrows raised in a mixture of surprise and reluctant admiration. Others began to watch more closely, sensing the brewing confrontation. "With respect, Professor," Amara continued, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Greenwood's work has been cited over 200 times in peer-reviewed articles, and the textual evidence itself suggests—" "Miss Bennet," Gaines's voice hardened, "perhaps you're confused about how this works. I have studied these texts for 30 years. I have published 18 papers on Ciceronian rhetoric alone. This isn't a debate club where all opinions carry equal weight." The room grew still. Even the chronic texters had put down their phones, attention captured by the tension crackling through the air. "I'm not questioning your expertise, sir," Amara said. "I'm suggesting there might be room for alternative readings that are equally valid based on the text itself." Gaines stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Then his lips curved into what might have been a smile, but looked more like a predator baring its teeth. "Let's test that confidence, shall we?" He turned toward the blackboard, chalk in hand. The scratching sound filled the room as he wrote an unfamiliar Latin passage in quick, sharp strokes. Professor Gaines stepped back from the board with a flourish, his chalk leaving a final, dramatic period at the end of the passage. White dust floated in the air as he turned toward Amara, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The Latin text covered nearly half the board, a dense paragraph with complex clauses and obscure vocabulary that seemed deliberately chosen for its difficulty. "Translate this, and I'll quit," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the lecture hall. Laughter rippled through the classroom. A few students exchanged glances, some looking uncomfortable, others clearly entertained by what was about to be an academic execution. The boy who always sat in the front row, the professor's favorite, smirked openly. "Come now." Professor Gaines gestured toward the board with exaggerated politeness. "You seem to have such profound insights into Latin texts. Surely this shouldn't pose any problem for a scholar of your caliber." Amara sat motionless for a moment. Her notebook lay open before her, covered in her neat, precise handwriting. Her throat felt dry. The passage on the board wasn't from any standard text. It appeared to be from an obscure legal document, filled with technical terminology and archaic forms that most third-year Latin students would struggle with. This was a trap, carefully designed to humiliate her in front of everyone. Slowly, Amara gathered her paper and pen. She stood, aware of every eye in the room following her movement. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained composed, betraying nothing of the storm inside. As she walked down the steps toward the front of the class, the whispers started. "She's actually going to try? This is going to be brutal. $10 says she doesn't get past the first sentence." Professor Gaines stepped aside with a theatrical sweep of his arm, his posture relaxed and confident. He crossed his arms over his chest, leaning slightly against his desk as if settling in to enjoy a particularly entertaining show. "The floor is yours, Miss Bennet. Illuminate us." More snickers. Someone in the back row made a soft, mocking sound. Amara stood before the board, her back to the class. She took a deep breath and studied the text, letting her eyes move methodically across each line. The passage was indeed challenging, but not impossible. She recognized elements from Republican-era legal Latin, similar to texts she'd studied independently last summer. She turned to face her classmates. A few phones were subtly raised, ready to capture whatever happened next. She caught sight of a girl in the third row, giving her a tiny, encouraging nod. "The text appears to be from a legal judgment dating to the late Republic," Amara began, her voice quiet but steady. "It translates as, in matters where a citizen's rights have been impugned without proper testimony, the court must consider not merely the letter of the law, but its spirit, as understood by our forebears. When Claudius Vestinus brought his claim against the property of Marcius, he failed to recognize that custom in such cases demands consideration of prior judgments." She paused, then continued with growing confidence. The precedent, established under the consulship of Gaius Piso, clearly states that no man may claim ownership through indirect means what he could not claim directly. The subtlety of language does not disguise the intent of action. The room had fallen completely silent. Even those who had been scrolling through their phones now watched with undisguised surprise. Amara didn't just recite words. She brought meaning to them, explaining shifts in tone and contextualizing difficult phrases. The final section employs more formal rhetoric, she continued. Thus, we conclude that attempts to circumvent established principle through linguistic maneuvering betrays not cleverness, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the law's purpose. The judgment is rendered against Claudius, with costs. She added, the phrasing suggests this was probably written during Cicero's era. Given the rhythmic structure of the final sentence, it bears his stylistic influence, though it's not by him directly. When Amara finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Every student sat motionless, some with mouths slightly open. The girl who had nodded at her earlier now wore an expression of undisguised admiration. Professor Gaines stared at her, his face frozen in rigid stillness. The smug smile that had played on his lips throughout her walk to the front had vanished completely. His arms remained crossed, but his fingers now gripped his biceps so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He seemed unable to respond, caught in a moment he had never anticipated. The silence stretched across the lecture hall like a taut wire. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the overhead lights and the distant voices from the hallway outside. Then, from the back row, a single pair of hands came together. Clap, clap, clap. The sound echoed through the frozen classroom. A student with glasses and a blue sweater nodded as he continued his hesitant applause. For a moment, he clapped alone, his expression uncertain, as if testing dangerous waters. 2 more students joined in. Then 5 more. Within seconds, the awkward scattered clapping swelled into genuine applause. Someone even whistled from the corner of the room. Amara stood at the front, her eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected this. The mockery and snickers that had followed her to the board had transformed into something entirely different. She could see it in their faces. Respect. Real respect. Professor Gaines cleared his throat loudly, trying to reclaim control of the room. He forced a laugh that sounded hollow against the applause. "Very impressive memorization, Miss Bennett," he said, speaking over the clapping. "Though I suspect you've simply committed a translation to memory, rather than truly understanding the nuances." His voice lacked conviction, the words falling flat even as he spoke them. The applause faded. Amara looked directly at Gaines, her expression calm. "I haven't memorized any translation of this text, Professor. I worked through it just now based on grammatical patterns and contextual clues." Her voice was soft but clear. "I'd be happy to discuss the nuances further if you'd like." A few students exchanged glances, eyebrows raised. No one had ever spoken to Gaines this way. The professor's face tightened. "That won't be necessary. Return to your seat." Amara nodded and walked back to her chair, every eye in the room following her. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Something fundamental had changed in the balance of the classroom. As she sat down, a girl next to her, Lily Thompson, leaned over. "That was incredible," she whispered, her eyes bright with admiration. "How did you do that?" Amara gave a small smile. "I just love Latin," she said simply. 2 rows behind them, a student with dark hair quickly checked his phone before slipping it back into his pocket. On the screen was a video, paused on the image of Amara standing confidently at the front of the class, with Gaines's stunned face visible in the background. Professor Gaines turned back to the board, erasing Amara's challenge with quick, aggressive strokes of the eraser. His movements were jerky, uncharacteristic for a man known for his composed demeanor. "Let's continue with our scheduled material," he announced, his voice slightly higher than normal. He launched into the day's lecture, speaking faster than usual, the words tumbling out as he kept his back to the class longer than necessary. When he did turn around, he kept his gaze fixed on the far wall or the first row, never once looking at Amara's section of the classroom. Gone was the easy confidence that usually carried him through lectures. He checked his watch repeatedly, skipping over slides that would normally have prompted lengthy discussions. Students exchanged confused glances as Gaines rushed through complex concepts without his usual detailed explanations. Several times he lost his place in his notes, something no one had ever seen happen before. 15 minutes before the scheduled end of class, Gaines suddenly closed his notebook. "That's all for today," he announced abruptly. "Review chapters 7 and 8 for next time." Students sat in surprised silence for a moment before slowly gathering their things. The usual post-class questions that typically surrounded Gaines's podium were noticeably absent. No one approached him as they filed out. As Amara collected her notebooks, she could feel eyes on her, some curious, others impressed, a few even nodding with newfound respect. She kept her head down, not seeking attention. When she finally stood to leave, joining the stream of students heading for the door, Professor Gaines remained at his desk. He watched her go, his face hardening into something cold and calculating. His fingers drummed once, twice on the podium before curling into a tight fist. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the Grind, the popular campus cafe where students huddled over laptops and textbooks. Amara sat in a corner booth, her Latin textbook open beside a half-finished cup of coffee that had gone cold. Her finger traced the same passage she'd translated hours earlier, but her mind kept replaying the moment, Professor Gaines's face as his challenge backfired. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, uneasiness had settled in her stomach like a stone. Standing up to Gaines hadn't been about showing off. It had been about defending herself, about not letting someone dismiss her knowledge just because they hadn't expected her to have it. "It's not like I wanted this," she muttered, closing the book with a soft thud. Her phone buzzed against the wooden table. Amara glanced at the notification. Grades updated. Classical Studies 401. She tapped the screen, navigating to the university portal. Her brow furrowed as the page loaded. Her weekly translation assignment, one she'd submitted 3 days ago, showed a grade of CI. "That can't be right," she whispered. She'd done exceptional work on that assignment. Professor Walters, who had reviewed an early draft, had even commented that it showed graduate-level insight. Yet here was a CI, accompanied by feedback that read only, "Inadequate understanding of nuance. See me after class." Amara scrolled back through her previous grades. A, A. Then this sudden drop. She zoomed in on the feedback section, searching for specifics, for anything that would explain what she'd done wrong. Nothing. Just that vague dismissal. "Mind if I join you?" Amara looked up to see Daniel Reeves standing by her table, a coffee in one hand and a thick legal textbook tucked under his arm. She'd seen him in her classical studies class. He was one of the few who asked thoughtful questions. "Sure," she said, sliding her books to make room. Daniel set his things down and took a seat across from her. "That was something this morning," he said, his voice low. "Gaines didn't know what hit him." Amara winced slightly. "You saw that?" "Everyone saw it. There's video making the rounds." He pulled out his phone, showing her a clip someone had posted to the campus social media group. In it, she stood calmly translating while Gaines's expression shifted from smugness to shock. "Great," Amara said, her voice flat. "That's exactly what I need. To be known as the girl who embarrassed Professor Gaines." Daniel studied her face. "You didn't want attention." "I just wanted to be treated with respect," she said, turning her phone face down on the table. "I didn't plan to challenge him. I just couldn't let it slide again." "Again?" Daniel asked, leaning forward slightly. Amara hesitated, then shook her head. "It doesn't matter." They sat in silence for a moment. Daniel took a sip of his coffee before speaking again. "For what it's worth, a lot of people respect what you did. Gaines has a reputation." "A reputation for what?" she asked, though she already knew. "For picking targets." Usually students who don't fit his idea of who belongs in classics. Amara's phone buzzed again. She flipped it over, expecting a text, but it was another notification from the university portal. Frowning, she opened it and scrolled through her other classes. "This doesn't make sense," she said, more to herself than to Daniel. "What's wrong?" he asked. "My midterm essay for Roman history. It was graded an A last week. Now it's showing a B." Daniel set down his coffee. "Can they even do that? Change grades after they're posted?" "They're not supposed to. Not without notification." Amara navigated to another class, Introduction to Medieval Literature. Another downgrade, from an A to a C+. Her heart began to race. 3 classes, 3 unexplained grade changes, all in the hours since she'd stood up to Gaines. As she stared at the screen, a new notification appeared at the top of the page. "Meeting required. Academic Review Committee. Thursday, 2:42 p.m. Amara's stomach dropped. She clicked on the notification, scanning the brief message beneath it. "Attendance mandatory to address concerns regarding academic integrity." Academic integrity. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. "Amara?" Daniel's voice seemed distant. "What is it?" She turned the phone toward him, her hand trembling slightly. "They're saying I cheated." Daniel read the message, his expression darkening. "This isn't random," he said quietly. 3 grade changes and an academic review, all on the same day you embarrassed Gaines? "He can't do this," Amara whispered. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Professor Harold Gaines wasn't just any faculty member. He was department chair, published author, the face of the university's classics program. And she was just a scholarship student who had dared to prove him wrong. Daniel's jaw tightened as he studied the notification. "You need to document all of this. Screenshot everything. The grade changes, the timestamps, any feedback you received before. You think that will help?" "I'm in my 2nd year of law school," he said. "One thing I've learned, when someone with power makes a move like this, it's rarely spontaneous. And it's rarely their first time." Amara stared at the meeting notice, the words blurring slightly, as her eyes welled with tears she refused to let fall. "This isn't about Latin anymore," she whispered, the realization settling over her like a cold shadow. Daniel looked at her, determination in his eyes. "No," he said. "It's about who gets to belong here, and who gets to decide that." Amara arrived 20 minutes early, her folder of evidence pressed against her chest like armor. The hallway was empty except for a student worker sorting mail at the far end. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor of the Humanities Building's faculty wing. Professor Gaines's door, dark oak with a brass nameplate, remained closed. Amara checked her phone. 8:42 a.m. His office hours started at 9. She leaned against the wall, trying to calm her racing heart. Inside her folder, printouts of her original essays, screenshots of the changed grades, and notes she'd prepared defending her Latin translation. Daniel had helped her organize everything last night. "Remember," he'd said, "document everything. Whatever he says, however he acts." The hallway clock ticked loudly. 8:57 a.m. Footsteps approached from around the corner, measured, unhurried. Professor Gaines appeared, briefcase in hand. He noticed her immediately, but showed no surprise. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice neutral. "You're early." "I wanted to be sure I didn't miss you," Amara replied, working to keep her voice steady. He unlocked his office door. "Come in, then." The office was exactly what you'd expect from a tenured classics professor. Bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a large wooden desk, framed degrees on the wall. A small bust of Caesar watched from a corner shelf. "Please sit," Gaines said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. He set down his briefcase, removed his jacket, and took his seat with deliberate calm. Gone was yesterday's flustered man, whose authority had been challenged. This was Professor Gaines in full command of his domain. "I understand you have concerns about your grades," he said, folding his hands on the desk. Yes. Several of my grades were changed yesterday without explanation. Academic assessment is an ongoing process, he replied smoothly. But that's not my primary concern today. He opened a drawer and removed a folder. From it, he extracted a document and placed it before her. I've been reviewing your work more carefully. This is serious, Ms. Bennett. Amara glanced down. The top page read, Academic Integrity Violation Report. Her name was typed neatly below. Plagiarism, she whispered, the accusation hitting her like a physical blow. Your translation yesterday was exceptional, Gaines said, his tone shifting to one of practiced concern. Too exceptional, in fact. The passage I selected contains nuances that first-year students simply don't grasp. Even graduate students struggle with it. I've been studying Latin since high school, Amara said, feeling heat rise to her face. Yes, so your application stated. A public high school in a district not known for its classics program. His smile was thin. The translation you provided matches scholarly work too closely to be coincidental. That's because it's correct, Amara said, her voice rising slightly. There are only so many ways to accurately translate a passage. Gaines raised his hand, cutting her off. Ms. Bennett, in my 30 years of teaching, I've developed an ear for when students are reciting memorized material rather than demonstrating genuine understanding. I didn't plagiarize anything, Amara insisted, clutching her folder tighter. I can explain every choice I made in that translation. I'm sure you believe that, Gaines said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. However, given the circumstances, I've recommended your case for disciplinary review. Amara stared at him, disbelief washing over her. This is retaliation, isn't it? Because I challenged you in class? Something flashed in his eyes, anger, quickly masked. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Bennett, one that reflects poorly on your character. My character isn't the issue here. I disagree, he said coolly. Academic integrity speaks directly to character. I'm concerned about your future here, which is why I've flagged this for review rather than making an immediate determination myself. The perfect trap, Amara realized. He'd positioned himself as the concerned professor, not the accuser, even while destroying her reputation. The committee will contact you, Gaines continued, closing his folder. I suggest you prepare carefully. First offenses can sometimes be treated with leniency. Amara stood, trembling slightly. This isn't right. What isn't right is taking shortcuts in your education, Gaines replied. That's all for now, Ms. Bennett. She left his office, the folder now crumpled in her grip. Once in the hallway, she pulled out her phone and called Daniel. He's accusing me of plagiarism, she said when he answered. For the translation. What? Daniel's voice sharpened. Amara, this is serious. Where are you? Outside his office. Stay there. I'm coming to you. His voice lowered. This isn't just unfair. It might be illegal. Retaliatory academic action violates university policy. He made it sound like he's doing me a favor, Amara said, her voice catching. Like he's protecting me by sending it to review. Classic manipulation. Don't fall for it. 3 hours later, sitting in the campus center, Amara's phone chimed. A new email appeared from Academic Integrity Board. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. This notice serves to inform you of a formal academic misconduct hearing scheduled for Monday, 10:02 a.m., regarding allegations of plagiarism in Professor Harold Gaines's Advanced Latin Translation course. Your attendance is mandatory. Failure to appear will result in automatic findings against you. The email continued with procedural details, but Amara could barely focus on the words. Her scholarship, her education, her future, everything she'd worked for, now hung in the balance. She stood outside the building, staring at her phone as students passed by, laughing and talking, their worlds intact while hers crumbled. The email's final line glowed on her screen like a death sentence. Students found in violation of academic integrity policies face sanctions, including course failure, academic probation, and possible expulsion. Afternoon sun slanted across the campus quad as Amara slumped onto a bench, her backpack landing with a thud beside her. Daniel arrived moments later, laptop tucked under his arm, his face tense with concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked, sitting down. "I'm not," Amara said. Her voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Daniel opened his laptop. "Let's look at exactly what they're claiming." Amara pulled out the printed accusation form Gaines had given her. The paper trembled slightly in her hands as she passed it to Daniel. "He's saying I couldn't possibly have known that translation, that I must have memorized it from somewhere or had outside help." Daniel scanned the document, his frown deepening. "This is thin, very thin. But that doesn't mean it's not dangerous." "What happens now?" Amara asked, opening her own laptop. Daniel sighed. "Academic misconduct hearings aren't like regular courts. They're heavily weighted toward protecting the institution." His fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the keyboard. "The burden of proof isn't beyond reasonable doubt. It's more like preponderance of evidence, just enough to tip the scales. So they only need to sort of believe him?" Amara's stomach twisted. "Basically, and professors get automatic credibility. Students don't." He pulled up the university's academic integrity policy. "See here? The committee is made up of 3 faculty members and only 1 student representative. That's not fair. It's not designed to be fair. It's designed to protect the university." Amara scrolled through the policy document, her anxiety mounting with each paragraph. "It says I can bring someone with me, but they can't speak?" Daniel nodded grimly. "I can go with you, but only as a silent support person. You have to defend yourself against a professor who's been teaching for decades." Her voice cracked. "How am I supposed to prove I didn't plagiarize?" "That's the worst part," Daniel said softly. "The accusation flips everything. You're guilty until proven innocent." A group of students walked by, their voices dropping as they passed. One girl looked directly at Amara, then quickly away, whispering to her friend. The message was clear. Word was spreading. "I need to talk to someone in the department," Amara said, standing abruptly. "Someone must see how wrong this is." They walked to the classics department, finding the administrative office still open. The secretary looked up as they entered, her smile fading when Amara introduced herself. "I'd like to speak with the department chair about a hearing notice I received," Amara said. The secretary's voice turned formal, rehearsed. "All academic integrity matters follow strict protocols. The department chair cannot intervene in active cases." "But Professor Gaines is retaliating against me," Amara insisted. "Someone needs to know that. Any concerns about the process should be submitted in writing and will be addressed at the hearing." The woman slid a form across the counter. "You can document your perspective here." "That's it?" Daniel asked. "A form?" "That's the procedure." The secretary turned back to her computer, conversation clearly over. Outside, Amara crumpled the form in her fist. "They're circling the wagons." "Exactly what I was afraid of," Daniel muttered. As they crossed the quad, 2 students from Amara's Latin class approached. They'd always been friendly before, chatting before lectures. Now they veered away, pretending not to see her. "Did you see that?" Amara whispered. Daniel nodded. "Academic accusations are like poison. People don't want it to rub off on them. But I haven't even had a hearing yet." "Doesn't matter. The whispers are enough." That evening, Amara returned to her dorm room, dropping her keys on the desk with a clatter. Her roommate had left a note. "Staying at Lisa's tonight." It wasn't her usual study night. The empty room felt accusatory. Amara sank onto her bed, phone in hand. She needed to talk to someone who believed in her. She dialed her mother's number. "Hey, baby girl," her mother answered, voice warm. "How's my college genius today?" Amara's throat tightened. Her mother had worked double shifts for years to help her prepare for college. The scholarship had been a miracle for their family. "Just checking in," Amara managed. "Classes are intense. You can handle intense. You always have." Amara closed her eyes. Mom, what if something happens with my scholarship? Is everything okay? Concern sharpened her mother's voice. Just hypothetical, Amara lied. The pressure gets to me sometimes. Listen to me. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. That's what we do. After hanging up, Amara stared at the ceiling. She couldn't tell her mother. Not yet. Not until she knew how bad it would get. Later, sitting at her desk, Amara looked at her carefully arranged textbooks. Latin grammar, classical history, linguistics. Books she'd cherished. Knowledge she'd earned. None of it felt secure anymore. She ran her fingers along the spines, wondering if they were already being taken from her, not physically, but in every way that mattered. Her scholarship, her reputation, her future, all hanging by the thinnest thread, ready to snap at the word of one man who couldn't accept being challenged by someone he'd underestimated. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the university library archives. The room smelled of old paper and dust. Amara hunched over a computer terminal while Daniel thumbed through physical files at a nearby table. They'd been at it for over an hour, searching in silence. "Look at this," Daniel whispered, sliding a folder toward her. Amara pulled it closer. Inside were academic misconduct reports from the past 5 years, all meticulously organized by department. "I requested everything related to the classics department," Daniel explained. "The archivist owed me a favor." Amara flipped through the pages. Patterns emerged like puzzle pieces clicking together. 6 students over 3 years, all accused of academic misconduct under Professor Gaines, all with similar charges: plagiarism, unauthorized assistance, misrepresentation of work. "They all withdrew," she muttered. "Every single one." Daniel nodded. "No appeals, no hearings. They just disappeared." "Look at their names," Amara pointed. "Rodriguez, Washington, Kim, Patel." Her finger moved down the list. "Notice anything?" Daniel's expression hardened. None of them fit his preferred student profile. "And there's no follow-up," Amara said. "No record of what happened after. Did they transfer? Drop out completely? That's what bothers me." Daniel pushed his glasses up. "It's like the cases got erased. These students vanished from the system without a trace." Amara felt a cold anger rising in her chest. This wasn't new. This was a pattern. A system. Students like her pushed out quietly, their voices silenced before they could speak. "We need to talk to someone who knows how this works from the inside," Daniel said. "Professor Vargas," Amara replied immediately. "Junior faculty in classics. She's always been fair." They found Elena Vargas in her cramped office, surrounded by stacks of papers and ancient texts. Her eyes widened slightly when Amara explained why they'd come. "You're treading dangerous water," Vargas said, closing her door carefully. She lowered her voice. "Gaines has been here 20 years. Department chair twice. The board loves him. But these accusations," Daniel began. "Disappear," Vargas finished. "Like smoke." She rubbed her temples. "I've seen it happen. A student raises concerns, then suddenly there's a counter-accusation. Academic integrity issues. The student backs down, transfers out. Problem solved." "That's wrong," Amara said. "Of course it's wrong." Vargas looked at her with tired eyes. "But it's how things work. The system protects itself." "There must be something," Daniel pressed. Vargas hesitated, glancing at her closed door. "There might be records. Not in the official archives. The department secretary before my time, Martha Winters, she kept her own files. Unofficial documentation." She wrote something on a slip of paper. "Try the basement archives. Section D7. They're reorganizing those files this semester." "Thank you," Amara said. Vargas's eyes met hers. "I never spoke to you. I can't afford to lose my position." That afternoon, Amara sat in Gaines's class, feeling every stare burning into her back. The whispers weren't even whispers anymore. "I heard she cheated on all her translations. My friend in administration says she's definitely getting expelled. How did she even get in here anyway?" Gaines lectured confidently about Ovid's metamorphoses, his voice carrying through the hall as if nothing had happened. Not once did his eyes move toward Amara's seat. She raised her hand during discussion. His gaze swept past her as if she were invisible. Total erasure. She was already gone in his mind. When class ended, students flowed around her like water around a stone. No one spoke to her. No one met her eyes. Lily, who had whispered admiration days before, hurried past with her head down. Outside the building, Daniel waited, leaning against a tree. "How was it?" "Like I don't exist." Amara's voice was flat. "I found section D7, Daniel said. "It's locked, but the work-study student has a key. He'll let us in tomorrow morning." Amara watched students crossing the quad, laughing, belonging, secure in their futures. Everything she'd worked for was hanging by a thread, all because she'd dared to be right in front of a man who couldn't bear being wrong. She turned to Daniel, something shifting in her chest. The fear that had paralyzed her was hardening into something else, something with edges. "We expose him," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Not just for me, for everyone he's pushed out. Everyone he's silenced." Daniel nodded, determination matching hers. "We find the evidence, we build the case, and we make sure he can't do this again." Evening light filtered through the blinds of Daniel's modest apartment, casting long shadows across the scattered papers covering his coffee table. Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, her back against the couch, while Daniel hunched over his laptop at the small dining table. Empty takeout containers and half-drunk mugs of cold coffee marked the hours they'd spent building their defense. "Play it again," Amara said, her voice tired but determined. Daniel nodded and clicked the video file. The classroom scene unfolded on the screen, familiar now after a dozen viewings. The recording, taken by a student from 3 rows back, had decent audio and a clear view of both Amara and Professor Gaines. On screen, Gaines stood with chalk in hand, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you think you understand it so well, translate this, and I'll quit." The class's laughter echoed through the speakers. "Pause it there," Daniel said. "Look at his face. That's not a professor challenging a student to demonstrate knowledge. That's a man trying to humiliate someone." Amara nodded, studying Gaines's expression. The smirk, the absolute certainty of her failure. "He never expected me to know the answer." Exactly. And that's our point. This wasn't about academic standards. It was about putting you in your place, Daniel said, making notes on a legal pad. "This video proves the bias that came before the plagiarism accusation." Amara rubbed her eyes. "Will it be enough? The academic board might just say he was testing me. That's why we need more." The video establishes pattern and motive. It shows he had it out for you before the plagiarism claim. Daniel tapped his pen against the table. "We need to prove this isn't the first time." Amara's phone buzzed with a text notification. "It's from Professor Vargas," she said, surprised. Daniel looked up. "What does she say?" "Nothing. Just a string of numbers." Amara showed him the screen. Daniel's eyes widened. "That's a password. Check your email." Amara opened her laptop and refreshed her inbox. A new message appeared from an anonymous account. The subject line read only, "Use within 24 hours." "She's giving us access to the faculty grading portal," Daniel said, peering over her shoulder. "Those credentials will expire tomorrow." Amara felt her heart race. "Is this legal?" "It's a gray area. We're not changing anything, just looking." Daniel hesitated. "But if anyone asks, I did this part alone. Your scholarship can't afford another mark." Amara nodded and typed in the password. The faculty portal opened, revealing years of grade distributions, comments, and evaluations. Daniel quickly showed her how to filter for Gaines's classes. "There," he said, pointing to a pattern in the data. "Look at his grade distribution over the past 5 years." The numbers told a story, a clear pattern of certain students receiving drastically lower grades in the middle of semesters. Most eventually withdrew. "Can we see who these students were?" Amara asked. "Not names, But demographic data is here. Daniel clicked through several screens. Interesting. Almost all scholarship students. Disproportionately women. Disproportionately minorities. Amara felt a chill. He targets people who don't fit his idea of who belongs. They worked methodically, documenting everything. Daniel created graphs showing the statistical anomalies. Amara compiled a timeline of inconsistent feedback on her own work. Glowing comments followed by harsh criticism with no change in quality. "This is building something solid," Daniel said, printing several pages. Combined with the video, it shows a pattern of behavior. Amara stood up to stretch her stiff legs. "I still don't understand why. Why go to all this trouble to push students out?" "Power," Daniel said simply. "Control over who gets to join the academic elite. People like Gaines see scholarship students, especially minorities, as diluting what they think is sacred." Amara's phone pinged with another message from Professor Vargas. "Found anything useful?" She typed back, "Yes, thank you." The response came quickly. "Be careful with this. Gaines has friends in administration." Daniel glanced at the message. "She's risking a lot to help you." "I know." Amara turned back to the computer. "Which means she knows he's done this before." As the night deepened, their case grew stronger. The preliminary defense took shape. Evidence of bias, statistical patterns, timeline inconsistencies. It wasn't perfect, but it was something solid to stand on. "We should sleep," Daniel finally said, rubbing his eyes. "The hearing is in 3 days." But Amara wasn't ready to stop. She clicked back to the video, watching it one more time. On screen, she saw herself walking calmly to the front of the room, facing the board, and delivering the translation that had triggered everything. This time, watching herself, she didn't feel the sting of the intended humiliation. Instead, she saw the moment for what it truly was, the beginning of exposing something rotten that had been hidden for too long. "This isn't just about clearing my name anymore," she said quietly. "This is about stopping him from doing this again." Daniel nodded, gathering their notes into a folder. "One step at a time. First we win your hearing. Then we can think about the bigger picture." Amara watched the video one final time, seeing not humiliation, but proof. The university administration building stood cold and gray against the morning sky. Amara tugged at her blazer sleeve, smoothing invisible wrinkles as she and Daniel approached the entrance. The pre-hearing meeting was scheduled in 15 minutes, and her stomach twisted with each step. "Remember," Daniel said quietly, "this is just preliminary. Stay calm. Stick to the facts." Amara nodded, clutching the folder containing their evidence. "I know. I just can't believe we're here at all." Inside, they were directed to a small conference room with a polished wooden table and uncomfortable chairs. University seal mounted prominently on the wall. Administrative power on display. Mrs. Taylor, the university conduct officer, entered precisely on time. She wore a navy suit and carried a tablet, her expression professionally neutral as she shook their hands. "Ms. Bennett, Mr. Reeves, I understand you've requested this meeting to present evidence before the formal hearing." "Yes," Amara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." Ms. Taylor sat across from them. "To be clear, I'm not deciding your case today. I'm simply reviewing what you have before the full committee sees it." Daniel nodded. "We understand. We believe this evidence shows clear bias and potentially a pattern of discriminatory behavior by Professor Gaines." Ms. Taylor's eyebrow raised slightly. "That's a serious claim." "With serious evidence to back it," Amara said, opening the folder. They started with the video. "Ms." Taylor watched it on Daniel's laptop, her expression unchanging as Professor Gaines challenged Amara on screen, as the class laughed, as Amara delivered her flawless translation. When it ended, Ms. Taylor tapped a finger on the table. "This shows an uncomfortable classroom moment, certainly," she said carefully. "But how does this relate to plagiarism?" "It establishes motive," Daniel explained. "Professor Gaines was publicly proven wrong by Amara. The plagiarism accusation came immediately after this incident. Amara slid forward the statistical analysis. And this shows it's not an isolated incident. Ms. Taylor reviewed the graphs showing grade patterns, withdrawal rates, and demographic breakdowns. For the first time, her professional mask slipped. Her eyes widened slightly. You compiled all this yourselves? With some help from departmental archives, Daniel admitted. These patterns show disproportionate impacts on minority and scholarship students. Amara leaned forward. I'm not the first student Professor Gaines has targeted, but I want to be the last. Ms. Taylor studied the data longer than necessary, then looked up. Where did you access these records? Daniel and Amara exchanged glances. We'd prefer not to compromise our sources, Daniel said carefully. But everything here can be verified through official records. Ms. Taylor nodded slowly, gathering the papers. I'll need to review this thoroughly. Some of these allegations go beyond your individual case, Ms. Bennett. That's exactly our point, Amara said. This isn't just about me. For a moment, Ms. Taylor's professional veneer cracked further. She looked troubled. I've been with this university for 12 years, she said quietly. We have processes for a reason. But, she stopped herself, returning to her neutral expression. I'll make sure the committee reviews everything carefully. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. I'll be in touch before the hearing with any questions. Outside the building, Amara exhaled deeply, leaning against a stone column. Did you see her face when she looked at those statistics? She asked. Daniel nodded, loosening his tie. She was surprised. That's good. It means this might not be as rigged as we feared. She actually seemed concerned. Amara looked up at the administration building's imposing facade. Maybe there are people who care about doing the right thing. Don't celebrate yet, Daniel cautioned. But yes, I think we made an impression. They walked across the quad, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds. For the first time in days, Amara felt something like hope stirring inside her. Across campus, in the oak-paneled office of Dean Matthews, Professor Gaines sat comfortably in a leather chair, sipping coffee. Harold, these accusations are becoming a nuisance, the dean said, not unkindly. The Bennett girl is making quite a stir. Students often lash out when caught, Gaines replied smoothly. Especially scholarship students who stand to lose everything. It's unfortunate, but we've seen it before. The dean nodded slowly. Still, I'm hearing she has some sort of video and data about past cases. Manipulated context, I'm sure. Gaines set down his cup. Richard, how long have we known each other? 20 years? Have I ever brought forward a case without absolute certainty? The dean smiled tightly. No, you haven't. And the department appreciates your standards. All I want is to maintain the integrity of our program, Gaines said. Sometimes that means difficult decisions. Later that evening, Amara sat cross-legged on her bed, laptop open. The day had been exhausting, but not without hope. Maybe, just maybe, the system might work for her after all. Her email notification chimed. From Taylor, Michelle, University Conduct Office. Subject, Evidence under Review. Dear Ms. Bennett, I am writing to confirm that all materials submitted during today's pre-hearing conference are now under official review by the committee. We will be examining both the video evidence and the statistical data presented. Please be prepared to discuss these materials in detail at your hearing. Regards, Michelle Taylor. Amara read the email twice. Not a dismissal. Not an outright rejection. Her evidence was officially in the system now. They couldn't just make it disappear. She allowed herself a small smile, the first one in days. The next morning arrived with deceptive beauty. Sunlight streaming through Amara's dorm window, casting golden rectangles across her desk. She rubbed sleep from her eyes and reached for her phone, the habit of checking emails first thing, now tinged with both hope and dread. Her screen lit up with a new message from the Academic Conduct Office. Heart pounding, she opened it. Her eyes scanned the cold, formal text. Regarding evidence submission, The video material presented has been deemed contextually irrelevant to the plagiarism charge. Committee guidelines restrict evidence to direct proof related to the specific academic work in question. Amara sat up straight, confusion washing over her. How could they dismiss it? The video showed clear bias, the setup, the trap. She continued reading, and her stomach plummeted. Additional evidence has emerged that requires your immediate attention. An unpublished academic paper from Oxford University's Classical Archives contains a translation of the exact passage in question. The similarities between your verbal translation and this document are substantial enough to warrant serious concern. Attached was a PDF, a scholarly paper dated 3 years earlier with highlighted sections showing translations remarkably similar to what she had provided in class. "This is impossible," she whispered to the empty room. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Daniel's number. When he answered, his voice was groggy. "They're saying I copied from some paper I've never seen," she said, the words tumbling out. "How could I copy something I didn't even know existed?" "Send it to me," Daniel said, fully awake now. 20 minutes later, they met at the campus coffee shop. Daniel looked as though he hadn't slept, his eyes scanning his laptop screen with growing alarm. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "The citation format doesn't match Oxford's standards. And look, the author's credentials are vague. No department affiliation." He pointed to another section. The writing style shifts dramatically between sections, almost like it was fabricated. Amara finished, her voice hollow. "He made it up. But this would take serious effort to fake," Daniel said. "The translation itself is sophisticated. The formatting looks legitimate to someone who wouldn't know better." Amara stared at the paper. "He didn't just want to embarrass me. He wants to destroy me." Her phone buzzed with a text from Professor Vargas. "I can't help anymore. I'm sorry." "Nothing more." "She's backing out," Amara said, showing Daniel the message. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "They got to her. Junior faculty with no tenure. She's vulnerable." The hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. Despite Daniel's last-minute preparations, Amara could feel the outcome solidifying around her like hardening cement. The committee room felt deliberately intimidating. A long table of 5 faculty members seated across from a single chair. Professor Gaines sat at the far end, expression appropriately somber, as though this pained him deeply. Amara presented her defense, explaining her years of Latin study, her ability to translate on the spot, the impossibility of her having seen an obscure, unpublished paper. "Miss Bennett," said the committee chair, "your academic record before this incident was indeed impressive. However, the similarity between your translation and this document cannot be ignored." "Because it's fabricated," she insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please, check the document properly. Verify its authenticity." The chair frowned. The document was verified by Professor Gaines, who obtained it through his Oxford connections. Daniel tried to interject about the formatting inconsistencies, but was swiftly informed that as he wasn't an official advocate, his speaking time was limited. The deliberation lasted only 15 minutes. When they returned, the verdict was delivered with clinical detachment. "Amara Bennett, this committee finds sufficient evidence of academic dishonesty. You are hereby suspended pending formal expulsion proceedings. Your scholarship status is frozen, effective immediately." The words struck her like physical blows. Suspended. Scholarship frozen. Everything she'd worked for, gone. Outside, Daniel was furious. "This is a railroad job. We'll appeal. I'll talk to the law school faculty." Amara barely heard him. The reality was crashing down, practical concerns flooding in. Where would she live? Her housing was tied to her scholarship. How would she tell her parents? That afternoon, she returned to her dorm room, moving mechanically as she pulled out her suitcase. Each item she packed, books, clothes, the small desk lamp her mother had given her, felt like surrendering a piece of her future. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from classmates who'd heard the news. Some expressed shock, others offered support, but most were just fishing for gossip. As she zipped her suitcase closed, a knock came at her door. Her residence advisor stood there with an uncomfortable expression. "I'm sorry, Amara. They're asking that you vacate by 5 o'clock. Amara nodded numbly. "I'm almost ready." She took one final look at the small room that had been her home, her safe place. Then she shouldered her backpack, grabbed her suitcase, and stepped into the hallway. Walking across campus, she felt eyes following her, some curious, some pitying, some judgmental. The weight of their stares pressed down on her shoulders as heavily as her bags. Professor Gaines's words echoed in her mind. "Translate this, and I'll quit." He hadn't quit. Instead, he'd made sure she would. That night, Amara sat in her dorm room surrounded by half-packed boxes. The university had granted her one extra day to move out after Daniel made some calls. The room looked hollow now, stripped of the small touches that had made it hers. Books were stacked in crates, clothes folded in bags. Her diploma from her high school valedictorian ceremony lay wrapped in tissue paper. The lamp cast long shadows across the bare walls. Outside, students walked to evening classes or dinner. Normal life continuing while hers collapsed. She picked up her phone and scrolled through messages from her parents. She'd told them only that there was a misunderstanding about her academic standing. Not the full truth. Not yet. The thought of their disappointment crushed her more than her own pain. Amara closed her eyes, letting the events replay in her mind. The lecture hall. Gaines's smirk as he wrote that passage. The brief victory. Then the systematic dismantling of her life. The fabricated evidence. The committee's cold faces. The verdict. "This isn't fair," she whispered to the empty room. Her words seemed to bounce off the walls. Something shifted inside her. Not acceptance. Not defeat. Something harder and more determined. She reached for her laptop and opened a blank document. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment, then began to move. "My name is Amara Bennett," she typed. "1 week ago, I was a scholarship student with a perfect academic record. Today, I've been suspended and labeled a cheater. This is what really happened." She wrote everything. The classroom challenge, her response, the recording that was dismissed, the mysterious document that appeared out of nowhere, the rushed hearing, the pattern she and Daniel had uncovered about other students, names, dates, details. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, the words pouring out of her. She didn't stop to polish or perfect. The raw truth was what mattered. 2 hours later, her phone rang. "Daniel, how are you holding up?" he asked, his voice heavy with concern. "I'm writing it all down," Amara said. "Everything that happened. I'm going to post it online." A pause. "Amara, wait. We need to be strategic about this. The university has lawyers. And what do I have?" she asked, her voice rising. "They've taken everything else. My reputation, my scholarship, my future. What else can they take? I understand you're angry." "I'm not angry, Daniel. I'm clear." Amara looked at her screen, at the thousands of words she'd written. Silence is what protects him. Silence is why he's gotten away with this before. "Just let me review it first, okay? Make sure you're not saying anything that could backfire legally." She agreed, sent him the document, and continued packing while she waited. Her Latin books were the hardest to box up. Years of study, of passion, reduced to evidence of a crime she didn't commit. Daniel called back an hour later. "It's solid," he said. "But are you sure about this? Once it's out there..." "I'm sure." After they hung up, Amara made minor edits, then took a deep breath. She posted the complete account to her social media, to the university's student forum, and to a website Daniel helped her create. Truth at Westridge University. Then she waited. Minutes stretched into hours. Her post gathered a handful of likes, a few supportive comments from friends. But no groundswell, no outcry. The university's social media accounts continued posting about campus events as if nothing had happened. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe no one would believe her. Maybe no one cared. Maybe Gaines really was untouchable. At midnight, she lay on her stripped bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she would have to leave. Find somewhere to stay. Tell her parents the full truth. She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally winning over anxiety. Her phone buzzed at 1:17 a.m. Probably Daniel checking on her again. But it wasn't Daniel. It was a message from someone she didn't know, responding to her website post. This happened to me too. 3 years ago. Same professor. Same accusation. I've been afraid to speak up. Until now. Amara sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Her heart pounded as she read the message again. She wasn't alone. She wasn't the first. She typed back with shaking fingers. Can we talk? The response came almost immediately. Yes. There are others too. Amara's eyes flew open at the first ray of sunlight. She'd finally fallen asleep around 3 after exchanging messages with Olivia Grant, a former student who had faced the same accusation from Gaines 3 years earlier. Her hand reached instinctively for her phone. The screen was filled with notifications. Dozens of them. She sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes, trying to process what she was seeing. Her post had been shared hundreds of times overnight. Comments flooded in, not just supportive messages, but testimonials. Professor Gaines accused me of plagiarism in 2018. I left the university rather than fight. He told me I didn't have what it takes after I questioned his translation. 2 weeks later, academic misconduct charges. I thought I was the only one. I've carried the shame for 4 years. Amara's hands trembled as she scrolled through message after message. Some were brief, just a line or two of solidarity. Others were detailed accounts that mirrored her own experience with disturbing accuracy. The public humiliation, the sudden grade changes, the fabricated evidence. Her phone buzzed with a call from Daniel. Are you seeing this? He asked without preamble. Yes, she whispered. I had no idea. It's even bigger than we thought, Daniel said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. I've been up since 5 cataloging everything. There's a pattern here, Amara, clear as day, and it's not random. Gaines specifically targets scholarship students, especially minorities. Anyone he thinks doesn't belong in his version of academia. Amara got out of bed and opened her laptop. More messages were coming in through the website. Email after email, some from students who had graduated years ago, carrying their silence like a weight. A new message from Olivia appeared. I have something you need to see. Can we meet? 2 hours later, Amara sat across from Olivia Grant in a coffee shop off campus. Olivia was 27, professionally dressed, with eyes that carried a wariness Amara recognized all too well. I never thought I'd set foot near this university again, Olivia said, sliding a folder across the table. But when I saw your post, I knew I had to come. What is this? Amara asked, opening the folder. Emails. I printed them before I left. I was going to fight back then, but... She shook her head. I was alone. No one believed me. Amara's breath caught as she read through the papers. They were emails between Gaines and another professor discussing how to handle the Grant situation. One line jumped out. The plagiarism claim doesn't need to be solid. It just needs to be enough to scare her off. He did this on purpose, Amara said, looking up. These prove it. Olivia nodded. And there's more. He mentioned another student he dealt with, the same way the year before. I found her too. She's willing to talk now. By afternoon, Daniel had transformed his apartment into a war room. Papers covered every surface. Testimonials were organized chronologically, showing a clear pattern spanning nearly a decade. 23 former students had come forward. 17 had faced plagiarism accusations. 14 had left the university, all after challenging Gaines in some way. This isn't just bias, Daniel said, taping another statement to his wall. This is systematic abuse of power. And the university enabled it by never investigating properly. Amara's phone rang. It was Professor Vargas. "I saw the website," she said, her voice low. "You need to know. The administration is meeting right now. This is getting media attention. They're discussing next steps. Are they going to try to silence us?" "I don't think they can anymore," Vargas said. "There's too many voices now." By evening, the university's damage control began. An official email announced a formal investigation into the allegations against Professor Gaines. A new hearing regarding Amara's case would be conducted, this time with external reviewers present. The local newspaper called for comment. Then a regional news website. Then a national education reporter. Amara sat on Daniel's couch, watching as their careful documentation transformed into something bigger than she had imagined. Her phone buzzed constantly. More students, more stories, more evidence piling up against the man who had tried to destroy her future. "They're calling for a public hearing," Daniel said, looking up from his laptop. "The pressure's working." "I never thought this would happen," Amara said softly. "When I posted that story, I thought I was just screaming into the void." "You gave people courage," Daniel replied. "Every person who stayed silent. You gave them a voice." As night fell, Amara finally returned to her dorm room. The boxes she'd started packing remained unfinished. She wouldn't be leaving tomorrow after all. She sat on her bed and opened her laptop one last time to check the website. Over 200 testimonials now. Not just about Gaines, but about other professors, other departments, other universities. People sharing stories they'd kept hidden for years. Olivia had sent her a message. "Committee meeting tomorrow. We'll all be there." Daniel had sent a detailed agenda for their preparation. 3 other students from her class had offered to testify about what they witnessed. Amara closed her laptop and took a deep breath. Yesterday, she had been alone against an immovable system. Today, she was part of something much larger. A chorus of voices that could no longer be ignored. For the first time since the accusation, she slept without fear. The hearing room buzzed with tension. Every seat was filled. Students, faculty, administrators, even local reporters crowded against the back wall. The university had moved the proceedings to a larger venue after realizing how many people planned to attend. Amara sat at a table facing the 7-person review committee. Daniel sat beside her, his laptop open, documents meticulously organized. Across the room sat Professor Gaines, looking confident but rigid in an expensive suit. 2 senior faculty members flanked him like bodyguards. This wasn't the secretive hearing from before. This was public. This was watched. The head of the committee, Dean Rivera, cleared her throat. "This special review has been called to reconsider the academic misconduct case against Ms. Amara Bennett in light of new evidence. We will also address broader allegations concerning Professor Harold Gaines's conduct." Her voice echoed through microphones set up around the room. "Ms. Bennett, you may begin." Amara stood, straightening her simple navy blazer. The room went silent. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a scholarship student fighting alone. Today, she represented dozens. "Thank you for reopening this case," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern." She nodded to Daniel, who connected his laptop to the projector. The screen lit up with a timeline. Names, dates, incidents spanning 8 years. 23 former students have come forward with similar experiences, Amara continued. 17 faced plagiarism accusations after challenging Professor Gaines in class. 14 withdrew from the university entirely. Murmurs rippled through the room. Gaines leaned over to whisper something to one of his supporters, his face a mask of indifference. "Ms. Olivia Grant will now present her testimony," Amara said, stepping aside. Olivia walked to the front, a folder clutched in her hands. 3 years older than Amara, she carried herself with the wary confidence of someone who had survived a battlefield. 4 years ago, I was accused of plagiarism after questioning Professor Gaines's interpretation of a text, she began. I lost my graduate position. I was told no one would believe me. I kept everything. Every email, every document. She opened her folder and removed a stack of printed emails. These show Professor Gaines discussing how to handle students who challenged him. In this one, she held up a page, he specifically mentions creating evidence if necessary. The committee members leaned forward. One asked for copies, which Daniel quickly distributed. Gaines stood abruptly. This is preposterous. Emails can be faked. This is clearly a coordinated attack on my reputation by failed students. Dean Rivera held up her hand. You'll have your turn, Professor. Please continue, Ms. Grant. Olivia finished her testimony, followed by 3 other former students with similar stories. Each one strengthened the pattern. Each one chipped away at Gaines's carefully constructed authority. Then came the moment Amara had been waiting for. Daniel took the floor, adjusting his glasses as he addressed the committee. The document used to accuse Ms. Bennett of plagiarism deserves special attention, he said. We had it analyzed by Dr. Marcus Soto, a forensic linguist from State University. He clicked to a new slide showing a detailed analysis. Dr. Soto identified specific writing patterns in the allegedly plagiarized document, patterns that match Professor Gaines's own writing style, not Ms. Bennett's. A hush fell over the room. Daniel continued, highlighting specific phrases, sentence structures, and word choices that appeared in both the document and in Gaines's published works. The statistical probability of these matching patterns occurring by chance is less than 1 in 10,000, Daniel concluded. This document wasn't copied by Ms. Bennett. It was created to frame her. Gaines shot to his feet again. This is absurd. I have 30 years of distinguished service. You're allowing students to conduct some kind of witch hunt against a tenured professor based on amateur analysis? Dr. Soto's credentials are included in the report, Daniel replied calmly. His analysis follows established forensic linguistic protocols. The committee chair studied the documents closely. Professor Gaines, these findings are concerning. Do you wish to respond to the specific linguistic patterns identified? Gaines's face flushed. I don't need to dignify this with a response. My reputation speaks for itself. Amara stood then, facing Gaines directly for the first time since that day in the classroom. The room seemed to hold its breath. That's exactly the problem, Professor, she said, her voice clear and steady. Your reputation has spoken for you for too long. It silenced students who deserved to be heard. It protected you when you should have been questioned. She picked up the forged document. You tried to destroy my future because I challenged you publicly. But the truth doesn't disappear just because you don't want to hear it. Gaines stared at her, his composure finally cracking. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. You don't understand the standards required, he stammered, but his voice had lost its authoritative edge. I understand exactly what the standards are, Amara replied. That's why I'm still standing here. A heavy silence fell over the hearing room as Gaines struggled to respond. The truth hung in the air, undeniable now. The committee members exchanged glances. One of Gaines's faculty supporters quietly moved his chair slightly away from the professor. The wall of protection around Harold Gaines, built over decades of prestige and intimidation, was crumbling before everyone's eyes. The committee chair cleared her throat, breaking the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. She conferred briefly with the other panel members, their whispers barely audible. Amara stood tall, her heart pounding but her face composed. Daniel remained beside her, a steady presence. We will take a 15-minute recess to review all evidence presented today, the chair announced, her voice echoing in the now quiet room. Please, remain nearby. As people filed out into the hallway, whispers erupted everywhere. Professor Gaines stalked to a corner, his attorney following closely behind. Their hushed conversation looked tense, with Gaines gesturing sharply several times. Amara stepped outside the main doors, breathing deeply. You were amazing in there, Daniel said quietly. It's not over yet, Amara replied, though for the first time she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. Olivia Grant, the former student who had provided crucial evidence, approached them. "Whatever happens, you've already won," she told Amara. "You stood up? That matters." The 15 minutes passed quickly. When they re-entered the hearing room, the atmosphere had shifted. The panel members sat straighter, their expressions resolved. Professor Gaines returned to his seat, his face ashen. "The panel is ready to announce its findings," the chair stated firmly. After reviewing all evidence presented today, including testimony from multiple former students, forensic analysis of the disputed documents, and the video evidence of classroom conduct, we have reached a unanimous decision. She turned her gaze directly to Gaines, who stiffened in his seat. "Professor Harold Gaines, this panel finds that you deliberately falsified evidence to accuse Ms. Bennett of academic misconduct. Furthermore, we find substantial evidence that this represents a pattern of discriminatory behavior toward students you deemed unworthy of your classroom." Murmurs rippled through the room. Amara felt a weight begin to lift from her shoulders. "Effective immediately. Your employment at this university is terminated. Campus security will escort you to collect personal belongings from your office. All of your current classes will be reassigned to other faculty members." Gaines's face contorted with shock. "You can't! I'm tenured! This is—" "Tenure does not protect against ethical violations of this magnitude." The chair cut him off sharply. "Your actions constitute grounds for immediate dismissal under Section 4.3 of the Faculty Code of Conduct." She turned to face Amara. "Mrs. Bennett, on behalf of this institution, I offer our deepest apologies for the injustice you have experienced. Your academic record will be fully restored, with all references to this case expunged. Your scholarship will be reinstated immediately, with back payment for the period of suspension." The chair continued, addressing the room. "Furthermore, the university will launch a formal investigation into all academic misconduct cases overseen by Professor Gaines during his tenure here. Any student who believes they were unfairly targeted may come forward for review." Several faculty members who had previously supported Gaines now stared at the floor, unable to meet Amara's eyes. One professor who had testified against her hurried from the room, face flushed with shame. "This hearing is concluded," the chair announced, striking her gavel once. People began standing, the room filling with voices. A university administrator approached Amara with paperwork to formally restore her status. Daniel helped her navigate the forms, explaining each one carefully. "I still can't believe it," Amara whispered, signing the final document. "Believe it," Daniel replied. "You did this. Your courage made this happen." Across the room, 2 security officers stood waiting for Gaines, who was arguing with the university's legal counsel. His voice rose sharply. "This will ruin me! 30 years of—" "You ruined yourself, Professor," the counsel responded, just loud enough for others to hear. "The university will be issuing a public statement this afternoon." Professor Vargas, who had initially withdrawn her support out of fear, approached Amara hesitantly. "I should have been braver," she said softly. "I'm sorry." Amara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. More people came to her, students, faculty, even administrative staff, each with words of support or quiet congratulations. When the crowd finally thinned, Amara gathered her things. Daniel walked with her through the building's wide hallway, past the classrooms where she had once felt like an outsider. "What now?" he asked. "I have a Latin class to prepare for," she replied, a small smile forming. "And then, maybe I'll write that paper I've been thinking about, the one on power structures in classical texts." They pushed through the heavy doors at the entrance. Outside, sunlight poured down, warm and bright. Amara paused at the top of the steps, looking out over the campus that had almost rejected her. Students walked by, unaware of how much had changed in the last few hours. She took a deep breath, feeling truly free for the first time since this ordeal began. The weight that had pressed down on her for months had finally lifted completely. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing came easier. Amara descended the steps, stepping fully into the daylight. Weeks later, the university lecture hall buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled. Students packed the aisles and leaned against walls. At the front stood Amara Bennett, no longer just a student, but a featured academic speaker. The dean finished her introduction. "And it is my honor to present this year's recipient of the Westfield Academic Excellence Grant, Amara Bennett." Applause filled the room. Amara stepped forward to the podium, looking out across the faces. Just months ago, this same hall had witnessed her humiliation. Now, it held her triumph. Her notes lay before her, but she didn't look at them yet. She took a moment, letting the silence settle. "Thank you for being here today," she began, her voice clear and steady. "When I was invited to speak, I wondered what I could possibly say that would matter. Should I just talk about Latin translations? Or should I speak about what we all know happened in this very room?" She paused, glancing toward the back where Daniel sat. He gave her a small nod of encouragement, his eyes bright with pride. "I chose both," she continued, "because you can't separate knowledge from power, or truth from the systems that try to bury it." The audience stayed silent, hanging on her words. In the front row sat several department heads, including the interim chair who had replaced Gaines. They watched with careful attention, their expressions serious. The passage I was challenged to translate that day was from Tacitus, his writing on how power corrupts. It wasn't chosen by accident. Amara smiled slightly. What no one expected was that I'd spent 3 years studying Tacitus for my independent research. A few students chuckled, breaking the tension. She moved to the projector, bringing up slides of ancient texts. "Today, I want to share what these words really tell us. Not just about Rome, but about institutions, about silence, and about who gets to speak with authority." For the next 30 minutes, Amara wove together classical scholarship with personal experience. She explained how language had been weaponized throughout history, how those in power controlled who could access knowledge and who could be heard. "When I was accused of plagiarism," she said, voice steady despite the weight of the memory, "it wasn't really about academic dishonesty. It was about belonging, about who has the right to know things, to challenge things." In the third row, Olivia Grant, who had provided crucial evidence against Gaines, nodded in recognition. "But knowledge doesn't belong to gatekeepers," Amara continued. "Truth doesn't need permission to be true." She moved through her presentation with confidence, explaining complex ideas in accessible terms. Students took notes eagerly. Even professors leaned forward, engaged. "The university has since reviewed 17 cases similar to mine," she noted. 15 other students have had their academic records cleared. 3 have returned to complete their degrees. Amara clicked to her final slide. A simple image of an open door. "The lesson I want to leave you with isn't about Latin or about one professor's misconduct. It's about spaces, who belongs in them, and who gets pushed out. It's about what we lose when voices are silenced." She looked directly at the faculty section. "And it's about the responsibility we all have when we see doors closing on others." The silence in the room was different now, thoughtful, reflective, perhaps even a bit uncomfortable for some. "I stand here today because people refuse to let me disappear," Amara said. "Daniel Reeves, who helped build the legal case." She gestured toward the back where Daniel sat. "Olivia Grant, who came forward despite personal risk. And every student who shared their story after I shared mine." The grant committee chair nodded from her seat, acknowledging the significance of the moment. "With the Westfield grant, I'll be expanding my research on marginalized voices in classical literature. I'll be examining texts that have been overlooked because they didn't fit certain narratives about who belonged in ancient scholarship." Amara took a deep breath, looking across the packed room. This was the same space where laughter had once cut through her dignity, where a professor had tried to make an example of her. Now, these same walls held a different kind of silence, One, of respect. Questions are the heart of learning, she said firmly. Not just the easy ones, but especially the questions that make people uncomfortable. The ones that challenge authority. The ones that refuse to accept "because I said so" as an answer. Students nodded. A few even applauded briefly before quieting again. So ask them, Amara concluded. Ask them even when your voice shakes. Ask them especially when someone tells you that you don't have the right to know. She paused, looking across the room, calm, confident, unshaken. This time, no one laughed. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.